I think, Steve, also you've got to recognize if you go back election cycles, the numbers this is off the top. I don't have the figures in front of me, but if you go back to congressional races and presidential elections, going back to our statewide elections, people seem to always get more negative around election time because all the politicians going around saying the state's in a mess, it's horrible, and I'm going to fix it. I'm going to be your savior and fix it. And so, I know in the last presidential election, for example, and up this last congressional election, I saw polls showing that the mood was down. People didn't have a great feeling about the future, and the candidates play into all that. What's interesting to me, though, that is more a political observation is that no matter how much we complain, we seem to always reelect the incumbents in Congress and the legislature. Occasionally there'll be a hot race, but in spite of all this negative feeling, throw the bums out in the fall, fire them all. It doesn't generally work out that way.
That's really interesting, Michael. Nationally, obviously, I think the top 2 or 3 candidates have no political experience at all. I think Jeb Bush, obviously does, but it's state, although it's a Bush name. So 38% of the people polled in your poll are satisfied with the candidates. My math, 62% are not satisfied. Now, do you have a feel for whether or not the lack of satisfaction is because they don't know them, or they know enough about them and they just don't want them?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of both, but probably right now it has more to do with a lack of name recognition, because not all of the other 62% said that they didn't like the slate of candidates. Some of them they just didn't have an opinion. But those numbers are not that uncommon this far out, and that question actually came from the spring version of the poll. And that far out, it's not that uncommon to find that for exactly the reason Jim said, that people oftentimes don't like the candidates in general until they find the guy they like, and then they really like that guy. I mean, just to reiterate what Jim said, it's one of the most interesting paradoxes, if you will, in American politics, is the fact that Congress can have its approval ratings. I know we're talking about the governor's race, but in Congress, its approval ratings can fall to where they're like less popular than cockroaches, and yet 90% of incumbents are reelected, or 90 to 95% are reelected. And this goes back to the idea that in general, in the abstract, I don't like the candidates, I don't like politicians. But as you get closer to an election day and people form attachments to particular individual candidates, they'll like that guy. They make an exception for that guy. And so those numbers are partly a function of, since I don't know who these candidates are, I'm going to fall back on my default opinion of candidates and politicians are scum.
Steve, I'd say this, though. The only difference this time, I don't think that this is going to happen, but the Trumpification of the process, if you will, of the outsider, and Steve, you just said it before about the top 3 candidates with Dr. Carson and for the lady for Arena, all are outsiders and playing up on the same thing nationally that Michael's poll found here on the statewide level. And you could almost, if I could give political advice to someone, the perfect candidate, you could almost say, look, there's 2 choices. There's these 4 guys running that are just all part of the old system. They've been around forever. No fresh ideas out there. Or this new guy. The new guy would be an independent. It would be a Jim Bernhardt. It would be a Lane Grigsby in Baton Rouge. It would be some business type who would kind of play off the Trump, the Trump sarcasm, the Trump focus on the system's messed up. And so Trump gives a great opportunity for a Baton Rouge man or a woman, if they could fund the campaign, I think run a very aggressive campaign and shoot right up very, very quickly.
Which actually I was leading up to something, and I'm glad you brought that up. One of the people whose name is bantered about, of course, is the Advocate owner, John Georges. As I see this poll, David Vitter, and please help me out if I'm wrong here, but David Vitter has, in terms of I mean, he's doing well in terms of the positive-negative relationship differential, but it's still very low. Am I correct there?
Yeah, so in the latest get-go, he has 45% of people have a favorable opinion of him, 30% of voters have an unfavorable opinion of him. So he's got a net positive of plus 15, and all the candidates have a net positive, but he actually does not have the highest net positive. He has the highest overall favorable. He also has the highest overall unfavorable. Darden actually has the highest net positive. So Vitter's in a very different position, right? So the other guys, they need to convince people. They need to inform people about who they are. Vitter's challenge, and there's all kinds of reasons to sort of see him as the front runner, but his challenge, because every candidate will face at least one, will be that the opposite of name recognition, of people not knowing who he is. Because he has name recognition, that means that the people who know him and like him, fine, but the people who know him and don't like him, that poses a challenge.
Actually, though, Steve, I thought it would be higher on Vitter's negative than it was. You know, to have it be in those numbers, I guess if I had to pick the person whose place I'd like to swap with and be in the race, if I had $10 million in the bank or whatever Vitter has, and have those numbers to build off of as a U.S. Senator, he's got a lot going for him with only 2 months to go. Now, if it's 6 months out, it'd be different. But with several months to go, there's only so much TV time. There's so much radio time. We're going to get enmeshed in all this crossfire, and so I think that right now I just don't see how you keep David Vitter out of the runoff. Now then it calms down and you get a whole new scenario. I think you get him in the runoff, and then picking up what you said about John George's, I should have mentioned him because you know he's run before. He looks like he has the financial resources. If he could run a very crisp, cutting campaign of saying it's me against those folks, and pick up on the Donald Trump message, and I think there'd be some real growing room for a guy like John George.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, and I'm not saying that John George ought to jump in, but he or somebody who can afford the campaign can certainly say, well, I'm not a politician, even though he lost twice. He's not a politician, even though he's been part of the system in terms of making contributions. I mean, so has Donald Trump. I'm not, I'm not a politician. I'm just wondering whether, based on these numbers, if that's something that that either John or others will pick up on.
I mean, I think you could look.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mike. Qualifications are the first week in September. We're sitting here with August 20th, so we basically got, 2 weeks, or a little over 2.5 weeks till qualifications open up. So, again, we can talk about all these potential theories like they are in the presidential race 15 months away, but we're right around the corner, and it's coming time to, fish or cut bait.
Yeah, that's right, and I think there's two ways of looking at these numbers from this particular survey. One is you look at them and you go, well, look, there's David Vitter is clearly a front runner, particularly now because he has name recognition, and the fact that these other guys aren't as well known means there's an opportunity. So that's one way of looking at it, and the numbers certainly can make that case. But I think if you embed the numbers in sort of a broader vision of the context of the election, it's not clear that just anyone could jump in and make a race for it. We know Vitter is going to be a huge factor because of the resources, not only funds he's going to bring in. And like Jim said, the time is running short, so there's not a lot of time to sort of get your name out there and try to compete against that. But the other factor that I think is going to play into it is because John Bel Edwards, although he's not widely recognized really at all right now, but the fact that he's the lone Democrat, if he can get some traction out of being the lone Democrat, he can get a sizable number of always Democratic voters to come behind him. And I'm not saying that necessarily guarantees him a runoff spot, but it leaves fewer votes left between what Vitter can eat up and what Edwards can eat up. And if there's enough votes left for another candidate to get, while Angel and Darden are also trying to get those votes,